The screen here, there are three quotes that you can see on the screens. Go ahead and take a moment and look at these quotes and type a number in the chat. Which quotes resonate with you? There are three quotes for us. Oh, I see lots of two. All right, Stacy Brown, I saw your name first. If possible, would you come off mute and let us know why number two jumps out to you?
If you don't address the problem initially, it just becomes bigger, and then you have a bigger problem to address down the road.
So by being proactive and having those uncomfortable discussions, we prevent further issues down the road. Absolutely. Thank you. All right, Destiny, how come number one jumps out to you?
I think because as leaders that when you have uncomfortable situation, this does bring the light to the surface of just like getting it out in the open and taking concerns of what needs to be said. And sometimes it's uncomfortable for people, but I think it's necessary.
Yeah. And Destiny, how do you
My
think,
computer is literally going crazy right now.
Destiny, how does that tie to leadership? Because
So I think it's, I'm
ahead.
sorry.
You're
I
good.
think it ties to leadership because as leaders, you have to be uncomfortable sometimes and have those uncomfortable conversations. And I think that as a leader, you have to uphold that and make sure you take ownership to it.
Yeah, right. As leaders, we have to role model. We have to demonstrate to our team, to the people around us that, hey, it's okay to have those conversations and we set the tone. Absolutely. All right, Jeff Gates, I see number three that you wrote in the chat. Come off mute, talk to us. What about number three? If possible.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I can't get my microphone off, but anyway, yeah, number three resonates only because I've had managers early in my career who refused to have difficult conversations with me, and it turned into a toxic relationship. And I have always, since I got into management, been willing to have very difficult conversations, easy conversations as well, only because you get to know your folks and truly get to know them on a personal level. You can have those conversations much more easily.
Yeah, absolutely. So what you just brought up, Jeff, is the fact that let's have more conversations instead of less, right? Both the easy and the hard one, and the more in communication we are with each other, even when we have those easy conversations, we build this trust to allow for more difficult conversations to happen. What you brought up there, Jeff, is what we call psychological safety, is when we create this environment where it's okay to bring up these conversations. And by creating this relationship with people, it's easier for us to have those more difficult, more poignant conversations. So these three quotes get us started on thinking about this topic of handling difficult conversations. So last week, I wanted to have a difficult conversation with a coworker. So at first, I wanted to chicken out. I didn't want to bring it up because it was going to be uncomfortable for me. And I thought it was going to be uncomfortable for her as well. But I told myself, it won't get easy if I keep avoid having difficult conversations. So I decided to message her. So I said, hey, I hesitated on whether to tell you or not, but I'm working on being more comfortable with having difficult conversations. So I decided to message you. I have a small piece of feedback if you are willing to hear it. And of course, she welcomed it and even thanked me for telling her. Difficult conversations are inherently uncomfortable. So if it's not impossible for us to have them. Sometimes it's worse in our head than in reality, right? So our goal today is how can we get some tools, some skills to have more of those difficult conversations, because explicit disagreement is better than implicit misunderstanding. So let's take a look at what are our objectives for today. There are three main objectives for us in this session, this morning session. So establish a plan to work through difficult conversations. We're going to look at ways to develop and organize our thoughts quickly in difficult situations, right? We're going to look at a few ways to help us do that. And we're also going to focus on maintaining productive and positive relationships. Just real quick, out of these three objectives on your screen, what words jump out to you as you're looking at these three things? What words jump out to you? So the Destiny has positive relationships in all caps, right? Productive, positive. To quickly organize our thoughts. One of the things that really muddle the water for us when we have difficult conversations are those emotions. And that's going to prevent us from thinking more logically, more calmly. Organize our thoughts, be more deliberate, more intentional when we are in those situations. Okay, Shirley says plan, organize, and focus. So the good news is we'll be doing targeting all these three things today. For us to be successful in this session, let's just talk about some logistics real quick. Here are ways for us to stay engaged during these sessions. One, as you already see, the chat is our best friend. That's when we all can talk at the same time without being rude. Let's continue to do an awesome job interacting with each other in the chat. You will also have the opportunity to come off mute and have a conversation with me and with everybody else, as you've seen from other people so far already. Jeff and Destiny coming off mute to talk to us. Please raise your hand, or when you're called upon, you can come off mute and have a conversation. We'll also be conducting a short Q&A at the end, though I will be monitoring the chat in case we see questions arising during the sessions. I'd be more than happy to answer them. Just letting you know, we'll also have a few minutes towards the end for us to engage in some questions and answers. Now, let's say if we don't get a chance to answer your questions, right? We have 151 of us on the call this morning. If we don't get a chance to connect on the call, feel free to message me, email me afterward, and we'd be more than happy to answer your question. Just a heads up, if you like the content today, we will also have a QR code at the end for you to let us know, like, hey, send me the slides, connect with me. If you also play pickleball, you can also tell me in the survey as well. So those are things to help us be more successful today. Now, we're gonna start with a poll, and this poll is going to ask us about different types of conversations. So I'm going to launch this poll for everybody. Once you see this poll, by the way, type yes in the chat, everyone, if you see the poll being launched. I just launched it. Okay, perfect, awesome. So if you see the poll, go ahead and input your thoughts. You can select multiple choices. There you go. Okay, we see people having giving negative feedback as a type of conversation they need to have. Okay, managing underperformance is a strong second that I'm seeing so far. Lots and lots of inputs. Okay. If you haven't done so, go ahead and take a moment and complete the poll that's on your screen. Let's take another 30 seconds. We are at 83%. Let's see if we can get over 90% of us participating on this poll today. What is a type of difficult conversations you are dealing with? I see a lot of us, actually 84 of us is giving negative feedback, which ties to the story with me and my coworker that I talked about at the beginning of the session, right? It can be really, really uncomfortable. All right, 10 more seconds. Five, four, three, two, one. All right, everybody, let's complete taking the poll. I'm going to end the poll now, and I'm going to share the results. Thumbs up if you can see the results on your screen. Okay, Andrew, you can see it. Perfect. All right, everyone, take a moment and look at the results. What jumps out to you? Thanks, Whitney. What jumps out to you when you look at the poll? You can type in the chat or you can come off mute. What jumps out to you? Yeah, absolutely. Giving a negative feedback tops the list. Yeah. Delivering negative information. Underperformance. So we're going to look at ways for us today to begin those conversations, begin those difficult conversations. All right. So that's what the majority of us would say is giving those negative feedback. Now let's think about this. For us on a more personal level, which one is it that you need to have more often? It seems like negative feedback is what we find, right? Most difficult. Which one is it that you need to have more often? Okay. Yeah, conflict. Which type of conversations do you need to have more often with those around you? At work, at home? Okay, so for Whitney is 3 as well. 7 and 8 for staff. Yeah, setting those boundaries and also talking about your career, right? If it's Jeff, what Jeff brought up at the beginning is like sometimes you might work with a manager who doesn't want to have those conversations on a regular basis with us. So it makes it more difficult. 3 and 2, 4 and 8, managing underperformance. Now, let's think about these different conversations we might have and let's just get an idea real quick. What makes it difficult, right? What the word difficult conversation, what makes it difficult when you think about those negative feedback, when you think about talking about underperformance, right? When you're talking about setting boundaries, what makes those conversations difficult? All right, Andrew Howell, you wrote uncertainty. If you can come off mute and talk to us, what do you mean by that? Uncertain about what?
Just the when you go into these difficult conversations, you don't know how the other person is going to accept the information or take information in these conversations. So there's always that level of uncertainty that you're not, everything's not planned, right? A lot of what we do is very planned and strategic, and you're throwing a wrench in that. You don't know where the other person is going to be at that point in time, emotionally or in their own career or work, and there's just that level of uncertainty. You're going to have to take it as it comes. You don't know what you're going to get when you approach a situation.
Absolutely. And that makes us a lot of us nervous, right? What if I approach them and they become defensive? What if I want to have a conversation and they say no, right? That can make it really hard. Thanks, Andrew. All right, Sarah, you wrote imposter syndrome. Come off mute, talk to us. What do you mean by that? How does that tie to this?
Well, yeah. So when you're telling somebody you didn't perform as expected, or you need to be doing this instead, by giving that kind of feedback, you're saying, I know what is expected. I am in a place to judge. And sometimes you can feel like, well, I'm not perfect. Who am I to give feedback to somebody else?
Yeah. So in that situation, we make it more about us, right? Like, who am I to give this person that piece of feedback when I have my own flaws, I have my own things to work on, right? So that's another huddle that stops us from truly engaging in that conversation. Thank you. Yep, the attitude, personality, conflicts, perceived reactions. There are these emotions that often associate with difficult conversations, right? So think about what you wrote in the chat and think about your own emotions. Which emotions do you identify with? Which emotion do you identify with? Type in the chat. I would say right off the bat, fear is a big one for a lot of people, right? And we see, yep, either is anxiety and fear, defensiveness, absolutely. Look at Elizabeth already giving her ideas in the chat on how to start the conversation. That's great, Elizabeth. We are going to circle back to that. 1, 5, anger, embarrassment. 1 and 2, fear. Okay, so these emotions are common when we think about having difficult conversations. Now, let's flip the script a little bit. Let's flip the script and consider this question. We know what we often feel. Now, how do we want to feel? How do we want to feel when we are having a difficult conversation? As in contrast to how we often feel, how do we want to feel? We want to be confident. We want to be trusted. We want to be clear and to the point. We want to be understood. Yeah. One of humans' biggest desires is to be understood. We want to be helpful. We want to be in control. Yeah. Confident, positive. And we want to reach a positive resolution, right? So keep all of those positive emotions in mind throughout this conversation and when we're about to enter a difficult conversation. The first critical thing in having a difficult conversation is managing our emotions. And it starts with having that desire on like, how do I want to feel? And that's going to lead our behaviors when we're in that situation. There is this leader who I trust and admire, and she was my former boss, and she says, when we lose our cool, they lose our message. When we're not in control of our emotion, we distract them with the vibes that we're sending out in that conversation. It makes it hard for the other person to receive our message. Or we can think of it this way. What is the difference, everyone, between a thermometer and a thermostat? What do you think is the difference between these two things? Elizabeth says you can adjust the thermostat, right? With the thermometer, a thermometer is more reactive to the environment. It takes in the temperature and it shows it. With a thermostat, we set the temperature and the environment, right? The environment adheres to it. When we are in a difficult conversations, we want to be more like a thermostat where we can set that positive, confident, supportive tone so that we can have a more productive, difficult conversation. Next time when we're in such conversations, let's think about, do I want to be a thermostat or a thermometer? And that's going to help us maintain that control and stay calm and positive. Now, easier said than done, right? So there are a few ways for us to control our emotions in a more positive manner. And these are the three things we can see on the screen here. The first one is labeling. Type yes if you heard of affect labeling before. Type yes if you heard of affect labeling. Okay, so William has, Shirley has, okay, Ron, no, it's okay. So labeling is a way for us to take the wind out of an emotion. When we label it, we take away its power. We might say, I feel frustrated right now because of how things are handled. I am angry because I feel undermined. Affect labeling, or labeling our emotions, reduces the activation of the amygdala. The amygdala is that emotional control center, which correlates to a reduction in self-reported distress when they conducted the study. It also activates the prefrontal cortex, which helps us be more in control of the situation. So labeling an emotion is the first step for us to maintain our calm. The second way for us to control emotion is to step away. Sometimes we forget that we can do that, is to remove ourselves temporarily from the situation. We may say, I'd like to have more time to think about this, to give a clearer answer, to be able to engage in this conversation. I hope that's okay. There's a quote that says, speak when you are angry, and you will make the best speech you will ever regret. Because our words are like toothpaste. Once they come out, we cannot put it back into the tube, right? So stepping away for us to regain, to bring things back to equilibrium. Sometimes we also forget that our emotions are temporary, meaning how we feel right now, no matter how visceral that feeling is, it might be different in an hour. It might be different the next day, right? So recognizing that this emotion right now might not be what I'm feeling tomorrow. So I need time to cool down. Those are three quick ways. Which of the three ways can you do more of when handling your emotions? Go ahead and type in the chat, everyone. Which of these three ways can you do more of when handling your emotions? Okay, so labeling it, stepping away, right? There is a scale when it comes to conflict. Some of us like to go into conflicts like head on, right? We want to hit the nail on the head and just get started. But with that, in there's certain situations where we might want to step away and give it a moment of reflection before we decide to engage, right? Stepping away. Julie, if possible, can you come off mute and elaborate on what you wrote in the chat? Not taking responsibility for others' emotions.
I really resonated with the quote from Brene Brown. I'm actually listening to her now. But one of the things that she constantly reminds me of is that I'm not responsible for how other people feel. It's hard enough to take responsibility for our own emotions, let alone somebody else's. And when you're having a conversation with somebody, especially a difficult conversation, the important thing to remember is being kind and being compassionate and letting them, have their feelings and express those feelings. But the thing I have to remind myself is you still have to be honest and stay within your integrity and tell them what they need to hear in a way that they need to hear it, or in a way that they can absorb that information. And one of the things I've seen a lot in the chat is staying productive and staying positive. And one of the things that I struggle with is I want to be there for that person that is struggling, and so I want to soften that blow, but that's not always kindness. That's not always helping them with what needs to happen. And so staying in my own integrity in that this is something that they need to understand, and maybe getting some nuance from them about their feelings, is helpful, but not getting distracted by those emotions and not taking over ownership or trying to make it better or, you know, trying to fix it for them. Like that's something that they can only do for themselves.
And it's hard balance, right, Julie? Thank
It
you.
is, yeah.
Right? When we're so empathetic, it's like, all right, so now I feel so bad for them that I don't want to bring up that specific behavior, right? So we got to keep in mind that both we can be empathetic and be clear, and focus on what it is that we're trying to have the conversations. So thank you.
Yeah.
What you just said, Julie, is, you know, it goes along with all the ways that we're going to look at. So when we're engaging in that difficult conversation. So thank you for setting us up. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay. So these are a few ways for us to first control our emotions, right? Which is the first critical step for us when we engage in those, you know, hard, uncomfortable interactions. Let's just zoom out real quick, everyone, and let's just think about this. Why is it important for us to have those difficult conversations, right? Because there's a quote that says, when we understand the why, we can endure any how. We're more willing to go through those uncomfortable emotions, thoughts, so we can do more of those, have more of those conversations. So there's two ways we can do this. If you can annotate on the screen, if you're, you know, an expert at Zoom, you're familiar with this, you can annotate on the screen. All you need to do is just go up to the top of your screen, hit view option, hit annotate, and use the text tool with your annotation toolbar. Now, if you're not familiar with it, absolutely, it's not a problem. Go ahead and type it in the chat like we've been doing. Why are difficult conversations important for us to have? Why can't we just, you know, brush them underneath the mat and just hope that it's going to go away? Okay, the problem has to be addressed. What else? Also, for those of us who are annotating on the screen, you want to click out of it once you're done. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to see your text. Okay, Kendra, you say progression and growth. You can come off mute and elaborate on that for us.
Absolutely. I feel like as you're having the difficult conversations, the other person may not know how they need to grow because they're just stuck in their way of doing things. And as they see how to grow, it also progresses them in their growth and in whatever situation or role that they're in at the time.
So it's not just our own growth, it's also helping people around us grow.
Correct.
Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome.
For us to grow, we sometimes have to be uncomfortable, right? To expand outside of our comfort zone. It will grow into a bigger issue, right? Trust. That's a big word. And it's interesting that we brought up that word for difficult conversations, right? Building trust is not just about those positive interaction. It's about, well, building trust is not just about, you know, like having those nice conversations. It's also about being willing to go through something more difficult with that person and breaking through that barrier to connect more successfully, to understand and also to be heard. Yeah. So I see a lot of, if we don't do something about it, it doesn't go away, right? It will fester into a bigger issue. All right, everybody finish typing in the chat or annotating on the screen. What Kendra brought up ties to this idea of what we call the Johari window. Give us a green check if you heard of this concept, the Johari window. Red X if you haven't, and that's okay. Okay. Yep, we see a few people saying, yes, I have heard of this before, and no, I haven't, and it's totally okay. Courtney has heard of it before. Nice. So the Johari window says that all conflicts fall into one of the four categories, right? The first one is the deeper green is the conflicts that are open in, then we call this the arena, not the area, the arena, right? So this is both parties understand that this conflict's going on. There's the hidden area is we might feel that conflict. We know that conflict, like when I'm having that piece of feedback that I want to deliver, but I don't tell my coworker, that's hidden. There's also conflicts that known to other but not known to me, which is like other people around me sees that problem, right? Everyone sees that problem except for me. So it's a blind spot that I'm not aware of. So tying it back to what Kendra said earlier is when we have more difficult conversations, it not only helps us grow, but it helps the other person identify that that's a blind spot that they are not aware of. And we can help them enhance their performance, improve their relationships with people around them. Now, you might be wondering what type of conflicts that are unknown to both parties. And this could be situations where, there might be a hidden factor like unconscious bias, or it could be deep-seated fears that are unexplored. So that might be a type of conflicts that fall into the unknown. The ultimate goal is how can we bring conflicts out into the open, right? Enlarge that first quadrant so we take it out of the blind spot and we also take it out of the hidden area. When we have more conflicts out in the open, we can prevent bigger issues happening later down the road. We can build trust and we can help ourselves and other people grow. So that's the goal is for us, when we successfully engage in those conversations, we create a stronger, positive, and more productive relationship. When I was holding back and not wanting to give that feedback, it doesn't help me or the other person, right? I feel like I'm keep repressing that feeling. So a high functioning team or a strong relationship is not the absence of conflict. It's how we deal with those tensions that strengthen our team or our relationship. So let's look at 5 ways for us today to have more difficult conversations. There are 5 ways that we're going to examine today. And the first one, as you can see on the screen, is what it's called begin in a friendly way. Beginning in a friendly way. And this is actually a Dale Carnegie principle. There are a couple ways for us to do this, to begin in a friendly way. One, we might say, this is something uncomfortable for me, but I believe it's important. Can I bring up something that might be difficult to hear? Another way we can say is, hey, I have a critical piece of feedback. Are you willing to hear it? The third way is we might say, hey, I have been thinking about having a difficult conversations with you on such topic. Are you willing to do it with me? Now, take a moment and look at these 3 ways. What do you notice right off the bat? How do these begin in a friendly way? Take a moment and think. Asking permission. They all ask for permission. Being upfront. Okay, Sarah, I saw your question. Is that sometimes disingenuous? Can you come off mute and elaborate on that question? Help us understand more what you mean by that.
So sometimes we have conversations that are pretty rough, right? I mean, they can be about terminating somebody's employment. They can be they can be hard. When you start with something so very soft and not collaborative, but it seems like you're setting a stage for something that is less uncomfortable for them than it may really be.
So that can ties to the disingenuous conversation part, right? It's like, are we leading them down the road to something that they don't expect, right?
Totally.
Yeah, so that can be really hard. The goal of this is how can we lower their guard so that they're more willing to engage in that conversation with us. And in that specific situation, Sarah, is we might want to be a little bit more upfront and still be empathetic and friendly, right? So we can say, we need to have these conversations regarding your performance, right? It has to do with how we approach it as a human being, and it's also our tone when we're engaging in that conversation. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, the phrasing asks the person to be open-minded. Absolutely. Again, it ties back to reducing that defensiveness. Who else has another way for you to begin in a friendly way when it comes to having a difficult conversation? I saw some earlier. If you still remember what you wrote, go ahead and retype it in the chat for us. Who else has another way to begin the conversation in a friendly way? Okay, so Chris says start with something positive. When we start with something positive, Chris, it's also important to keep in mind that there's a three-letter magic word that we like to put in there once we say something positive, right? And it's the word but. We can start with something positive, and I do it a lot. We also want to be aware that we don't negate everything we just said with the word but. So the one reason we want to ask a question, ask permission, is because we might ask, like, hey, are you willing to do with me right now? And they might say no. They might say no. They might not want to engage in a conversation. And that's okay. We have to be willing to accept that they are going to say no. Because if someone is not in the right emotional state to have that conversation, it's probably not the good time for us to have that conversation. But now, since we brought it up in this way, now the ball is in their court. Now it's up to them to do something about it, because we are willing to bring that up. We did our part, and now it's up to them to whether they want to receive that ball or not. So beginning in a friendly way. Ooh. Okay, so Julio, what you just wrote goes with the second way for us to have more difficult conversation, is stating the outcome. So Julio wrote, I can expect much more from you and you can deliver it. And I just have to bring this up to you so that you can improve, and this fits your high standards, right? Focusing on the outcome of what we want the conversations to be about. And what Julio wrote is also a trust and a belief that you know this person is capable, right? And you want to have these conversations to help them bring it back to that level. So number 2 is stating the outcome. Well, actually, just do this. Green check if you've heard of Stephen Covey. Stephen Covey. Green check if you've heard of him. Yep. Stephen Covey, thanks, Whitney. Stephen Covey has a quote that says, begin with the end in mind. And having an outcome, stating an outcome for a conversation serves as the anchor. Because a lot of times we assume the other person understands our intention, when in fact they might not, right? They might be dealing with their own emotion and they don't know where we're coming from. It also shows that we are in control because we are focusing on responding instead of reacting. Remember, the thermostat versus thermometer. So for the outcome, stating the outcome is for us to establish a mutual understanding and agreement. Now, let's see if we can play a little game and do a little quiz here. On the screen, there are 3 choices for us here to state the outcome. Go ahead and type in the chat, out of the 3 ways that you see on the screen here, which of these is a good way to state the outcome for the conversation? And if you want to type in the chat, you might want to close your annotate tool because Zoom doesn't allow you to do both at the same time. Okay, so I see a lot of C's. Okay, Alicia, are you willing to come off mute and tell us why you chose C? Seems like everyone is agreeing with you. Why do you choose C? Alicia, I feel like you might be speaking. We just can't hear you yet. So we'll come back to you. Carly, would you please come to the rescue and help us? You also wrote C in the chat. What made you choose C?
Yeah, I think C is a great option because it's not coming off as only telling them that they're doing something wrong, whereas A might be a little bit aggressive, like immediately talking about the interrupting in meetings, but it comes off more collaborative if we can start the conversation of, hey, let's discuss how can we both come to a conclusion rather than coming off with the more like harsh front, I guess.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. And it also ties back to not beginning in a friendly way, right? So we right there, if we do that, we raise that wall, we increase that defensiveness from the other person. Absolutely. All right, so here is another scenario. Now, A, B, or C. It's okay, Alicia. Thanks for letting us know. Now, choose A, B, or C. Same thing. Which one is a good way to state the outcome? All right, Stacy, if you're willing to come off mute, what makes you choose B?
Sorry, I meant to be, it should have been A.
Okay. Okay.
I just typed the wrong letter.
That's all right. That's all right. As I was curious to see why you chose.
No, B's the worst one.
Okay, what makes B the worst one?
Because you are, in a sense, attacking the other person instead of it making a collaborative effort to focus on what the end goal is and to work toward that goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Right, A is more about that goal, that end goal for both parties. B is more about targeting, blaming their identity. Like, you're always late. That's who you are, right? And people don't want to be labeled that way, especially in a negative light, right? B is about attacking that identity. And that right there, we probably would have lost that person if we say that, because they would probably get up and walk out. So B is not a good option, because when we use always, never, those absolute words, that doesn't go well a lot of time when we have those difficult conversations. Yeah, Danielle says fixing the solution instead of blaming. So the second way for us is to focus on the outcome. It's more collaborative and less blaming. Again, this has to do with reducing that defensiveness, making it also more comfortable for us to have those difficult conversations. So we looked at beginning in a friendly way and stating the outcome. Now, going back to what Julie said is, we still have to be assertive in that conversation. We can be empathetic. We also want to be assertive in communicating our boundaries, our expectation, and what we saw. And this has to do with what we call the SBI model. The SBI model. I didn't say FBI, I say SBI, right? And this model, it was developed by the Center for Creative Leadership. And it's a way for us to give feedback more constructively, more clearly, and focus on promoting a positive change by focusing on the behavior, that specific behavior that the person did in that situation. And it has three parts. It first starts with the situation, like where was this? When did this happen? Being concrete, right? It's not like you always do this. No, like last week, an hour ago in the meeting. The more specific we can be with the situation, it helps the other person remember when that happened. And for us, that's a way for us to provide that evidence. And then the behavior. Now, what did they do specifically, right? Did they raise their voice? Did they talk over you? Did they say something that offended you? The more specific we can be with the behavior, we communicating clearly what it is that we want to see changed. And then the impact. Why is it important for us to discuss the impact of their behavior in this SBI model? Raise your hand. If you have a thought, raise your hand. Why is it important for us to address the impact or to bring up the impact? When you have a thought, raise your hand. Yes, Elizabeth.
Hey, Tree. So, for me anyway, the point behind what's the impact of this is I need to know why this behavior is affecting the other person in a negative way, or what possible consequences it could have in the future.
Yeah, so it's understanding the impact on other people and also the consequences of that behavior. That's more motivating when I know the impact of it, right? Thanks, Elizabeth. Andrew, I also saw your hand raised for a hot second. What would you add to what Elizabeth said?
I think she said exactly what I was going to say. The impact on the organization or on that person's career. If this behavior or situation is continued, I think they have to know that. Also, a lot of people sometimes just live in their own world and their own projects, their own work, their own whatever, and they don't see the impact on other people or the organization. So they may sit there and just think, well, this only matters to me. Why are you making a big deal out of it, right? So them seeing the impact on the organization or on their own career may not always be at the forefront.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And when we think about that Johari window, right, this could be a blind spot for them, that they're not aware of how their behaviors are impacting the team, the group. So for us to tie in the impact, we enlarge that open area into that blind spot area so that they are more aware. So it could be an example like this. We can say during last two project updates, including the one on Wednesday, I noticed that your deliverables were submitted a few days late. This caused some delays in our timeline and added extra pressure onto the team to catch up. So we have this situation, we have this behavior, this specific behavior, like the deliverables were submitted a few days late. And we can even be more specific. It's like, hey, it was a day late, 2 days late. And why does that matter? Well, because it's creating more pressure on the team. It's shifting more work and for us to try to scramble last minute and try to catch up. By framing the feedback this way, we provide specific objective information to help the person understand what the issue is and not attacking them as a person by focusing on the behavior. So situation, behavior, impact. Who has a question about this before we jump into a breakout? Who has a question about the situation, behavior, impact model? Okay, so let's see if we can practice this new tool that we just learned. What's going to happen is we are going to be in a breakout with a few other people, might be 4 or 5 other people in your group. And we're just going to choose one of the 2 scenarios that we see on the screen. The good news is I'll be sharing the screen, so you have it in your breakout with you. When you're in there, choose one of the 2 scenarios and work with your group and discuss how might you address this feedback using the SBI model. Specifically, how would you script this out? How would you tell this person, stating the situation, behavior, and impact? We'll spend 5 minutes in this breakout, and when you're in there, I'll have the screen so you can have this conversation with your group. Who has a question before we do that? Awesome. When you're in there, go ahead and unmute yourself, or you can type in the chat to interact with your fellow participants. When you're in there, you can quickly introduce yourself, begin in a friendly way, and choose one of the 2 scenarios. Here we go. See you all back in a little bit.
No. We had a great conversation. We chose number 1 because most of us identified with that one. It resonated a little bit more with us. And we actually started off based on that first way to have a difficult conversation, which is begin in a friendly way.
Yep.
So we decided we wanted to say something like, "Hey, I have some critical feedback. Would you be open and willing to hear it?"
Yep.
And then we had we noticed, I noticed that the email that you sent to the client
Yep.
was a bit candid and curt, and maybe the tone didn't intend to come off or wasn't exactly how you wanted it to be conveyed in the email.
Yeah.
And that definitely has an impact as our reputation as an organization. Also, it could affect future work with the client. They may maybe not give us as much grace in the future because they may not feel respected. And then I assume we would take it to the next level, which is a request. Would you be willing to, whatever the request is, would you be willing to maybe word it in a more empathetic and compassionate way?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, everybody, give Sarah and her group a round of applause. Thank you, Sarah, for demonstrating that to us. Right.
Sure.
So as you're talking, the impact gives it so much weight as to, okay, so who cares? Like, who cares why I'm incurred? Like, I'm just being who I am, right? Understanding that it impacts our reputation, and it might, stop us from strengthening this partnership in the future. So explaining to them clearly why that behavior is important to change is so important for them to understand that this is not a behavior that should be continued. Thank you. Yeah, people wrote well done in the chat. Great job, Kara and team and group. All right. Which group discussed number 2? Type yes in the chat if your group discussed number 2, scenario 2. Kara just did a wonderful job of demonstrating how number 1 might be communicated. Which group talks about number 2? Type yes in the chat. Take a moment and think back. Okay, it's Elizabeth's group. What about everybody else? Arnav, All right, so Arnav, if you're willing to come off mute and let us know, what did your group discuss regarding number 2?
Yes, sure. And first of all, I'm glad to join another of your session, try after I think almost a year. I did your leadership course last year, and I will never forget how you introduce yourself to remember as a tree. Tree fam.
Yes.
So that moving tree, and yeah. So yeah, it's awesome to see you back. And we discussed on these behavior, second situation, and we came up with this kind of a brief, like to use the SBI model. We said that, hey, it's just a feedback, but during the last week presentation to the leadership team, when you went through the project success, I noticed that you mentioned about the project success as a whole, but you didn't mention about the team members' contribution. And as a result, it has got some impact on the team members and impacted the team morale. And they kind of felt unrecognized and left out. And also, it's a good forum to recognize people.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Arna. And there's certain words that you mentioned in there in that one, right? So I noticed that. And then you mentioned when you talk about the impact, as a result, the teams didn't feel, the drop in morale, they didn't feel recognized. So those are great words to first talk about the behavior. I noticed that. And then as the result, tying into the impact. All right, everybody give Arnav a round of applause as well. Thank you for demonstrating how we might use the SBI model with scenario number 2. Way to go, Arnav.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Who else has a thought regarding this SBI model before we move to the next step? Okay, sounds good, Courtney. SPI model. Sweet. So the 5 ways. The 4th way is to listen and validate. And this is critical in having a difficult conversations, because remember, it's a conversation, right? So being willing to listen and hear the other person's perspective allow us to have to understand the fuller picture, the whole picture, not just from our perspective, because at times there might be emotions involved that cloud our viewpoint. So being willing to listen and validate what the other person said, invite more of that collaborative conversation. So for instance, let's see if we can get 2 volunteers to read us this scenario. Let's see here. Joshua Humphreys, I see you're on the call here with us today. Are you willing? Okay. Joshua, are you willing to role play this with me?
Absolutely.
Okay. So Joshua, what if I'll be Jordan and you be Joshua, and we're going to engage in this conversation? Okay, so I might start saying, I feel like my ideas are always overlooked in meetings. It's really frustrating because I put a lot of thought into them.
I hear that you're feeling frustrated because you feel your ideas aren't getting the attention they deserve.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It seems like whenever I share something, it just gets rushed aside.
It sounds like this has been really disappointing for you. I understand why you do this and feel this way.
Yeah, it's been hard because I really believe in the ideas I'm bringing to the table.
I appreciate you for bringing this up. Your input is important to the team, and I want to make sure that we address this. Let's discuss how we can make sure your ideas are properly considered and valued in our meetings.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Joshua. All right, everyone. How does Jordan show that he listened? And type in the chat, or you can come off mute.
I like how he validates what Jordan's sharing, and he says, I hear your feelings frustrated.
Yeah, so he validated with I hear that you're feeling frustrated. Thank you. He repeated the words, right? He repeated what Jordan said and allowing him to feel heard, right? Because there's a book that I was reading and it says, like, if the person says they're angry and we says, yeah, I can hear that you're frustrated. It says, like, no, I'm angry. So us being willing to even like repeat what they said and validate how they feel instead of trying to change how we want them to feel. That's an important point to make. An important way for us to have that genuine conversation is to actually validate what the other person said. And he also validated what he heard. What makes you say he stayed calm, Charlie?
Just by the way he's talking and showing his understanding of his point of view, and hearing him out and not being rash, and yeah.
Yeah. And we can see it through the way he discussed with the person, right? Thank you. So to listen and to validate, there's one tool for us to use when we want to make sure that we hear their person and we understand where they're coming from, is with a verbal cushion. So a verbal cushion, type yes if you heard of a verbal cushion before. Type no if you haven't. Type yes if you have. Okay, Brian said no. Monica says no. That's okay. So a verbal cushion, we can use it to either empathize, to express our understanding, or to acknowledge the person's perspective. So to empathize, we can say is, I can see why that would be frustrating for you. Or I can understand why you feel that way. We can say that sounds like it has been really challenging for you. A lot of time we go into the conversation thinking one way, thinking that this person intentionally did something to hurt us, when in fact it might be unintentional. It might be something that they're not even aware of, or they didn't understand the impact. And then we can acknowledge the person's perspective after we listen to them by saying, I'm glad you're telling me how you feel, or it's helpful to hear things from your side. Now, something to point out is it doesn't mean we have to agree with their behavior, right? This doesn't mean we have to change how we the feedback we're giving them. This is about us understanding from their perspective, so we can have that more productive conversation. So we can use a cushion to express understanding and to acknowledge the person's perspective. Which of these cushions can you potentially use in your conversation next time? Go ahead and type in the chat. Which of these cushions can you potentially use in your conversation next time? Okay, Kelsey said, I see how this is frustrating to you. It's helpful to hear your side of things. Understand what you may be dealing with. Yeah. Like I mentioned earlier, there's this 3-letter word that we use a lot after we cushion, right? It's helpful to hear your side of things, but I really appreciate you giving me your perspective, but, right? The danger of using this word is that we can negate everything we said. We doesn't make the person feel validated and listened to. And but is an acronym. And it stands for before the ultimate truth, right? So Elizabeth says we can replace but with an and, or we can pause. Replacing but with an and, or we can pause. And that still allowed us to have the conversations, to move the conversation forward, right? I understand where you're coming from. I validate your feeling. And let's discuss how we might move forward, you know, with to help to continue to make sure that we have a strong relationship, to continue to make sure that everyone feel heard and included, right? We don't have to say but. We can say and it gives a different tone to the conversation. So 5 ways. The last one is restating the outcome. And this is just us quickly circling back to what we said at the beginning, right? We don't have to come up with anything new. It's just a matter of reminding the person that, hey, I care about this relationship. I want to make sure that we are on the same page going forward. So restating the outcome for the 2 parties involved help the person think back to why this feedback is important for everyone in the conversation, right? Restating that outcome. Just simply as thank you for having that conversation. My goal for us to continue to have strong relationship going forward. So 5 ways for us to have more difficult conversations. Now let's let us discuss in the chat which of the 5 ways would make a positive impact in the way you handle difficult conversations. Which of the 5 ways would make a positive impact in the way you handle difficult conversations? Okay, so for Shirley, it's listen and validate. A lot of time we think it's such a common sense thing to do, and it's not always common practice. We see a lot of listen and validate. So, Teresa, why listen and validate for you? If you're able to come off mute.
Yeah, I think that when you listen and validate, you're
you're open to hearing their side. And they're not feeling attacked, but they're able to communicate back also.
Yep, absolutely. And again, we're creating that environment where it's safe to open up and to have a conversation, right? Thank you. Also, you have nice hair. Yeah, it looks healthy and voluminous. Thank you, Teresa. All of them can be used depending on the situation. Okay, which one would be the hardest to apply? Out of these 5 ways, which one would be the hardest to apply? Oh. Okay, so Julie says beginning in a friendly way is the hardest to apply for you. How come, Julie?
I think when I'm starting the conversation, there's so much that I feel like I don't know. I want to feel a sense of control, and I don't know how they're going to respond. I don't know where their head's at. Just getting started and just that first push to get it going. I think, especially, in the context of having a difficult conversation, it's something that I naturally avoid. And so that feeling of avoidance is really strong in me. And so it's like, I will roll over this in my head for 5 weeks and completely script it out. And I know that no matter what, getting it started, it could derail. And so it's just an avoidance issue for me, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I'm in the same camp, Julie. I tend to avoid those difficult conversations, right? And I come to realize that it doesn't help.
Yeah.
It will continue to avoid, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that we can do, well, okay, let me ask you this, Julie. Like, if you would coach yourself, what would you tell yourself?
So I do this all the time. Because of my role, I have to have difficult conversations a lot. So, 5 weeks is an exaggeration, obviously, but yeah. One of the things that I often tell myself is I am compassionate, kind, empathetic. I am the best possible person to have this conversation, and they deserve to have that conversation with me because I'm going to care about them throughout the whole thing. But it's that, I don't want anybody to feel put out or judged or any of those things, those emotions that I know are human nature. They're going to have them regardless of how I started out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's just like, yeah, I start out like, man, I feel for you. This is going to hurt. Kind of a thing. But again, reminding myself that, I'm probably one of the best people to have this conversation with them because I do care, because I am compassionate, because I won't judge, and that I'll see them for the human that they are, warts and all. And keeping in mind that we're in it together. Like, this is a team thing. This isn't a you versus me thing. Let's figure this out together. But it's that getting started, because it's like, you never know, is somebody going to get angry or emotional or all of those things that you can't predict. Is there going to be a scene? Like, can I control this? It's the unknown of that in getting started, in starting that conversation, because it just could go so many different places. Yeah. And it was funny in our group, I noticed it when the first person was talking about it. One of the things that we missed in our group conversation was beginning in a friendly way. I think it's like we all immediately were like, no, we got to be direct. Like, that's not cool. Like, we gotta show that. And so it's like, even being compassionate and caring and all of those things, like, you still have a tendency to lean towards directness. And so it's that dichotomy of, how do I do this in a friendly way, but still stress the seriousness of the issue?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Julie. So you say that's the hardest thing for you to do. The way from hearing you talk, I mean, you have the right intention, and it sounds like you already begin in a friendly way of showing that I care about you, right? Let's have this conversation. We're on the same team. I want you to be successful. That's exactly what beginning in a friendly way is. So it sounds to me like you already do a good job of that. What I'm hearing also is that directness, right? So now I'm beginning in a friendly way, but how do I communicate the expectations, the behaviors? And that when we lean into the SBI model, right? Stating a specific behavior and the impact on the team, on them, on their performance, that's going to help us balance between both being compassionate and empathetic and being direct.
Yeah.
And keep in mind when we use these weights in this manner, like beginning in a friendly way, stating the outcome, we're creating that cushion. We're creating that environment where our directness doesn't come across as an attack, but it's a way to bring to their attention because we've asked them permission to have the conversation and they say yes. We clearly demonstrate why this conversation is important, right? So we explain the outcome. Now they're more willing to engage and listen to that specific feedback because we have done the groundwork, the setup to create a successful conversation. Thank you. All right, we have 4 minutes. Actually, let's do 3 minutes. We have 3 minutes for questions and answers regarding this topic. Who has the first question? Go ahead and raise your hand. What did we not answer that we should discuss? Okay, so I see one in the chat. Monica says, how do these tips differ if you're trying to have a difficult conversation with a coworker that is either an equal or even a superior, but not direct superiors? How does the hierarchy affect the response, right? So there is a power dynamic here that we're talking about. And also with the person who's superior to us, but then not directly our manager, right? So it's also feel like, hey, I'm not privy to having this conversation with the person. I would say they would still apply, right? Asking permission to have that conversations with the person and stating the outcome. The stating the outcome here is important because they might not understand, like, I don't work in the same department as you, right? I don't manage you directly. Why you bring this up to me? Stating that outcome, clearly outlining why is important, right? And we can still listen and validate and address the specific behavior. If they've done something that impacts us, that's an opportunity for us to communicate that to the person. So I would say these 5 ways would still apply, no matter if it's someone that's not your direct manager. We can still have that conversation.
And I will add a layer onto that. What if the difficult conversation that you want to have is not only affecting you, but is affecting the others in your department, but everyone else just wants to avoid the situation, and you want to be the one to be hopeful that there is a good outcome out there if only we actually talk about it. And so the effect of the conversation does not necessarily just impact you, but could also impact others.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing we can think about, Monica, thank you for bringing that up, is one, let's consider with this person who is a superior, who's not a direct manager, are we the best person to bring this up? Right? Are we the right person to bring this up? Or is it possible to now escalate this to our manager and let them have that conversation, right? So be thinking about the context. It's also important for us to, let's say, we can have a conversation with our team and say, I'm feeling this way. How does everybody else feel? And assess the situation, because we might think, oh, nobody is doing anything, when in fact there might be things behind the scene that's happening that we're not aware of, right? So do a pulse check, have conversation with the team, and then decides who is the best person to bring up this conversation with that superior that's not our direct manager. Thank you.
Okay, that's a good,
Mhm.
good suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Catherine, what is your question?
Hi, I wasn't sure how to type it out, so
Okay.
it's more of a bridging the gap between two emotional levels. If you have to have a difficult conversation with someone who is either you've got someone that's not as sensitive included in a conversation with someone who is very sensitive, depending on who it is, like how do you bridge the gap? Because trying to meet them halfway, the recipient, if they are a very sensitive person, may take what you feel as compassionate speech, not as compassionate. They may want even more. So how do you bridge that gap and not, because I've seen sometimes sensitive people use that as an excuse not to be held accountable or have those conversations. To avoid the conversation, they use their feelings and their sensitivity as, I just can't, you can't talk to me. And it's like, no, we need to address this. So how do you bridge that gap?
Absolutely. And this goes with stating that outcome, right? Having a clear outcome of why. So, okay, so we said why this is important. Like, tell me exactly why is that important? Like being explicit about it. And when we think about these 5 ways, they're kind of like levers. And depending on who the person is, the more sensitive or less sensitive, we might linger in one of these ways longer, right? So if someone who is more sensitive, we can listen and validate to make them feel safe to have that conversations. We might state the outcome to have the conversation. Someone who's more direct, we can talk about the specific behavior, and we can be brief with the beginning in a friendly way and stating the outcome and get directly to the behavior. Because sometimes they might just say, "It's just tell me, like, what is it that you want me to change?" So depending on the person, we can pull these levers and tap into them and expand on a certain area. So thank you, Catherine, for that questions. I know we're right at time. If you have a moment, go ahead and scan this QR code if you want us to send the slides, if you want us to reach out to have more conversations, or you just simply want to hang out and play pickleball. If you do want to play pickleball, let us know. Let me know what court you are playing at. So take a moment and scan this QR code. Appreciate your time for being here with us today. Go ahead and take this moment and do that. You're welcome, Julie. You're welcome, Carly. Thanks, Dave.